It was pretty cool when the first two Turok games got announced for the Nintendo Switch. Both of the remasters that released for PC and Xbox One were headed to handhelds. The first game released in March and the second game just kind of dropped off the radar for a while. They were announced at the same time, so having such a big gap between releases is a bit strange, but thankfully it popped up on the eShop about a week ago and handheld fans can finally trek through both Turok 1 and Turok 2 on the go. And even better, both of the games are going to be discounted in price until August 16th, so if you didn't buy the first game, you can now get it on sale. But let's get right down to business. Here is my review of Turok 2 Seeds of Evil Remastered for the Nintendo Switch. When it comes to story, Turok 2 is a direct sequel to Turok 1. At the end of the first game, Talzet tries to destroy the Chronoscepter, unaware that in destroying it, he has awakened an old sealed entity known as the Primogen. Years later, a lot of different races under the influence of the Primogen are going into the Lost Lands and trying to destroy mystical towers in order to free him from his prison. You play as Joshua Fireseed, a descendant of Talzet who's sent into the Lost Lands to prevent that from happening. Turok 2 has a lot more story and a lot more voice acting than the original game did, which doesn't say a lot because Turok 1 basically didn't have an in-game story. But when you start the game, you get this nice long cinematic scene with a lot of voice acting telling you who you are and why you're being sent to the Lost Lands to prevent the Primogen from being unsealed. But the story does have a problem. The majority of the cutscenes in Turok 2 aren't even about Turok 2. The majority of boss fights have a lot of cinematic scenes that talk about Oblivion, the antagonist that doesn't show up until Turok 3. There's so much of this foreshadowing that it feels like there's a lot more foreshadowing to Turok 3 than there is actual story in Turok 2. There's nothing wrong with foreshadowing into sequels. A lot of movies do it nowadays in post-credit scenes, but when over half of the story is just foreshadowing to Turok 3, it feels like Turok 2 doesn't really get that much time to shine in terms of plot. When it comes to gameplay, Turok 2 is a first-person shooting game with a lot of exploration elements thrown into the mix. As you go through each stage of the game, you're going to be running at high speed, shooting down enemies, and looking for hidden areas and objects. First of all, this is not based off of the N64 version of Turok 2, but the remaster that released for PC and Xbox One in 2017 and 18. As such, all of the graphics have been polished, and you've got a new feature in the game in the form of quick warps to all of your unlocked portals. And of course, all the original cheat codes come back as well, but it is worth noting that a few of these cheats don't work by themselves. You can use the big cheat to unlock everything, but the codes for some of the cheats, like infinite ammo and infinite lives, don't work by themselves. But that's really just a minor inconvenience. The real problem with this version of Turok 2 Remaster is the fact that the multiplayer feature from PC and Xbox One is completely missing here. Not only can you not play the game with your friends, but one of the big points of the remaster was the fact that they added a new multiplayer game mode to it that the original didn't have. Now once you get into the single player game, you can start having a lot of fun running around and shooting down dinosaurs and genetic hybrids. Now progression in Turok 2 isn't really that different from Turok 1. Once you get through the initial level, you're introduced to a big hub with a lot of locked gates that go to pretty much everywhere else in the game. Your goal is to go through all the levels and collect keys that will unlock the portals to future levels. The only small difference here is the fact that the hub from Turok 1 was in its own expansive level, and the hub in Turok 2 is pretty much just its own thing. But just like the original, every level is going to have enemies for you to fight, but a ton of exploration for you to be doing. The main path is unlocked by shooting through enemies and hitting switches in secret areas to unlock doors, but you've also got a lot of mission objectives which the first game did not have. Every stage has these objectives, which are normally going and destroying or activating some objects and saving NPCs from locked cages. These do give you a bit more to do in each level than just searching around for the proper exit, but they are mandatory, meaning you cannot leave the level until you finish all of them. Now at the beginning of the game, this was a pretty interesting little feature to encourage you to explore more of the levels than just finding the main path to the exit. But the farther I went along in the game, the more of a hassle these objectives seemed to be. I always did a significant amount of exploration in each level by the time I actually found the boss in the exit, and the objectives turned into, I have to go and do this, let's hurry up and find it so I can actually leave and go to the next level. Not to mention being a very time-consuming process. On many occasions, I spent more time looking for that last NPC to save in a level than I spent on the entire rest of the level with discovering everything and finding the path. The objectives are a nice feature, but they shouldn't have been completely mandatory. But hey, you have one flawed gameplay system and another really great and fun one. The actual combat and platforming here is a lot better than Turok 1, and it's very fast paced and very fun. You've got a lot of different kind of weapons that you can do, from typical pistols and shotguns to weapons where you literally launch nukes at groups of enemies. There was never a lack of fun when it came to running around and shooting down enemies, especially with some stages having exclusive special different weapons that you could use, like a mountable Triceratops with 2 rocket launchers mounted on its shoulders. Mix that with the flight mode cheat and you have a really wacky and crazy little adventure. Now all of this stuff does come together to have a decent amount of content and length. Turok 2 Remaster on the Nintendo Switch costs about $20, and the main campaign, assuming you don't use cheats to skip a bunch of stuff, should take you about 10 to 12 hours to complete. While it's not nearly as good of a deal as some other recent re-releases like Doom 3 Switch port, it's still plenty of content for the money you're paying. Let's dive into controls for just a second, not to say anything bad or criticize anything, but just to note that this game has gyro and motion controls enabled by default and they work incredibly well. It's very smooth and really helps with all the long range sniping you can do. Now let's dive into presentation, which looks pretty good just like Turok 1 did. This is based off of Turok 2 Remaster, so all of the jagged edges from the N64 version are completely gone. It looks very smooth, crisp, and clear in both docked and handheld mode, and performance is pretty much the same. It's got a nice smooth frame rate. I didn't notice any significant drops, so it looks good and it plays good. Now let's get into battery life, which is actually a little bit better than Turok 1 got. Turok 2 for the Nintendo Switch has a battery range of 3 hours and 24 minutes on high settings, up to 4 hours and 28 minutes on low settings. Now in conclusion, Turok 2 comes to the Switch mostly intact and pretty optimized. Now the original game's story and objectives flaws are a bit of a bummer along with the lack of the new multiplayer mode, but if you're a fan of the series and want to go through the main campaign on the go, this is still a fast and fun shooting game. Reviews to Go rates Turok 2 for the Nintendo Switch a 7 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thanks for watching and have a great day.